to ask me any question during my speaking, because I would like it to be interactive if I'm not understood. So I'll start from where we gave a title of The Wandering Jew, which I very much like. I would like to use the word wandering in both senses of the word. Yes, I'm wandering because I have traveled across the world to get to where I am at the moment. And yes, I'm a wandering person. I think I'm a thinker. And one of my main issues in life is tikkun olam. So that will come into the project I'm working on at the moment. So bear with me. Okay, my parents are both Polish. They were born in Krakow. The two families knew each other in Krakow. So when my parents were kids, they actually knew each other. And then the war broke out. My mother's side was less lucky than my father's side. They remained in Krakow till 1943, made it to Hungary, were hidden in a convent, and then liberated by the Russians in 1945. My father's family escaped through the Trans-Siberian route to Russia, then Mexico. They, like Michael's in-laws, got certificates from Sugihara, the Japanese consul. And they made it to Mexico and eventually got visas to get to New York. My mother made it to New Zealand in 1947. And in 1953, 1953, her father figured that a beautiful woman like my mother, an Orthodox Jewess, will not find a proper Jew husband in Wellington, New Zealand. So he shipped her off to Brooklyn, to Borough Park, where she lived with her uncle, my great uncle, who very quickly tried to match her up. Shidduch her to various men, and my mother was too proud and said, no, no, no. Anyway, my father's grandmother heard that my mother was in Brooklyn, and she got both my parents together. So my parents got married. 9 months later, my brother showed up. And then 4.5 years later, I showed up. And my mother decided to enable my father to have his dream. And his dream was to move to Israel. So off we moved to Israel in 1963. My brother was nearly 6 years old, and I was a 1.5 years old. My brother, 2 days after, we landed in Israel on a Friday, Erev Shabbat. On Sunday, my brother went to school. Big shock. And yet, we stayed. We stayed. The reason I'm giving you this history is because it's taking me ages to figure out, number one, my identity as an American, an Israeli, a Jew. When I was growing up in Israel, my parents decided, as war survivors, they're going to hold on to the American passports. We're not going to get Israeli passports. We're not going to get an Israeli citizenship. We're going to remain Americans in Israel. And my parents, a very gorgeous couple, were able to do so in their own way, not knowing whether this will affect their two sons or not. And it so happens both sons immigrated from Israel. My brother went back to the States, and in 1986, I moved to London. However, my trail was a bit different than my brother's. I went into the Israeli army and succeeded to remain in the Israeli army for 3 years. And the Israeli army, as an American, I wasn't obliged to go into the army. However, I decided that this will be my link to the state of Israel. If I ever choose to live in Israel, that would be the right thing to do. And that is exactly what happened. I gave 3 years to the country, and it solidified my emotional bond to my people. After the Israeli army, I went to Betzalel in Jerusalem, did my 4 years in Betzalel, was hit over the head, and moved to London, where I arrived shell-shocked. I was very fortunate to have a grandmother living in London who knew Michael's parents-in-law. I met them on one of my visits, and I was enabled to stay with them when I first moved to London. And that was my first taste of an English Northwest London family. Now, I was a bit of a rebel. At this point, there's not much growing on my head, but at that point, I arrived with a big mop. And clearly, I was a mystery to many. I didn't talk much. I was a bit shell-shocked. I didn't know what I was doing. I knew I graduated with honors from Israel, from art school in Israel, but I also had the feeling that what I was coming with may not be so welcome in my field in this country. So I started off saying that I'm American. I've got an American accent. And I also realized that my portfolio from Israel had Hebrew all over it. So I had to modify this portfolio. I had to figure out, how do I present myself without having links to Israel? And I started creating certain artwork, which became very appropriate for the time. And I was soon later, I went for meetings with the Sunday Times. I started working for the Sunday Times. And I worked for them for 10 years. I was a budget cut, but as things happen, when you become a budget cut, or when a door shuts, another door opens. And what happened was, the doors opened in Israel. I started working from London to Israel because the technology enabled us to do so. And I became Flavor of the Year. I started working for all the newspapers there. Now, all at once, in different styles. And what happened was, in order to be on top of things, I made it very important for me to find out on a regular basis what's happening in Israel politically, what's happening culturally, what's going on, in order for my work to be relevant. And it worked. It worked. Now, obviously living in one place, working for another, and taking in the culture of the other has brought up things from the past for me. And my identity started shifting. Clearly, what was happening in Israel was affecting me emotionally, and I started realizing I'm not American, I'm Israeli. I grew up in Israel from the age of 1.5 to 24. That's formative years. You can't argue with that. So I realized I'm Israeli and I can't hide it anymore. I don't want to hide it anymore. I'm doing amazing work for Israel. Why can I not show it to my English clients? And I started also realizing who held on to me and who didn't. And I said, hey, fine, don't need you. Lo tzarich. I will be my own, and I will do my own. And that's how I kept on going with my own being. However, over time, I realized, well, I'm living in England, and yes, my roots are in Israel, and yet I'd like to belong here. And I didn't know precisely where I belonged, but things started happening. And I can date 1997, there was a horrible helicopter accident in Israel. 2 helicopters collided, 77 soldiers were dead. That was in 1997. It was Erev Purim. And I found myself completely paralyzed. I couldn't move. I was that horrified. And I found myself going for a Seudat Purim in Golders Green with a second family I know here called the Silbers. And I walked in and the place was silent. And we sat around the table silently the whole evening. And I felt at home. I felt at home because I realized this is where I belong. This is where I will be understood. These people feel precisely the way I do. So that's where a process of trying to fit in began for me, where I realized there are people, probably the religious ones, because I've got a religious background, and I will probably fit there more than in any other community that I could fit into, the Israelis or the Americans, whatever. For me, this is where I will be. And that's a very strong decision for a wandering Jew. But for me, it was the right one. For me, it was the right one. I felt I was surrounded by war survivors, people who understood what war survivors is all about. Then I started realizing, wait a minute, what I experienced as a son of war survivors in Israel is a completely different experience than here. I'll give you an example. I have a friend in Israel. Her name is Ayelet Menachemi. She's a film director, and she directed a film called Israel Time. And she tried to define what Israel Time is. And in 60 minutes, she was working up to a crescendo where a minute before her movie ended, the siren. The most bonding experience in Israel one could ever have, either on Yom HaShoah or Yom HaZikaron, where we all stand up, head down, and we hear a siren, and we remember, and we're together. I do this in London. I put the siren through my computer, I stand up, with my head down. I do this every year, twice a year, here in London. So for me, for my friend Ayelet, who pointed this out to me, wow, that is true. That's where my bond is, and that's where I feel I belong. So, I'm not looking at the clock, but I'm wondering whether I should now move a bit onwards to the project I'm working on at the moment. Clearly, there's a lockdown. Clearly, there are a lot of things happening. Clearly, we're Zooming with each other, and a lot can happen from one's desk. One doesn't have to leave one's desk to be part of a community, as we're doing right now, or communicate with one's family in Israel, or with clients around the world. There just needs to be some sort of connection, some sort of trust. So the way I operate at this point is to cultivate trust, because the world is changing. We're not earning money as we did before. We have to find a new way to communicate with each other on a commercial level in order for something to happen. So an example for that is another project I'm working on at the moment. I was approached by a producer in Israel who basically is trying to create performances, musical performances, but relating to poets of the past in Israel. So he came to me as a portrait artist to create an image for an event which he would like to produce. Now, one doesn't have to be a genius to know that theaters are shut. Public musical events cannot take place. In other words, no money. Do I do the job or don't I do the job? Well, I'm Daniel Morgenstern. I do all the jobs which come my way, whether I'm paid or not. So I decided to do the job, but I also decided to negotiate a possible future payment. So a contract. And in the contract, I specified, I will be giving you the artwork for no money at the moment because you can't pay. However, my image will be used for raising money. So I would like you to remember the joy that you had getting the artwork. And when you do have money, I'll be happy if you pay me what you think I deserve. And he was in tears. I told a friend in London about this, a non-Jew. He said, what are you doing? I said, he has no money. I want to work. My work is going to travel. Other people will see it. Maybe other people will get money for my services. If I'll say no, I won't be working. That's my way of thinking. Okay, so back to Tikkun Olam and what's happening in this world at the moment. Okay, we had coronavirus, and then we started having Black Lives Matters, which started causing a lot of unrest in various places. And now we go to some cousins in America. I've got cousins everywhere. I've got one cousin who's a photographer. He's a Getty photographer. What is Getty? Getty is a photo agency. They send their photographers to all kinds of red carpet events, and the photographers take pictures of celebrities entering and exiting all kinds of Oscars and this event and that event, and that's what he does. And he's very good. He's got this huge camera, lots of lenses, and his pictures appear in lots of newspapers and magazines. However, lockdown, no newspapers, no red carpets, nothing. So my cousin Noam Galai, who's about 32 years old, started walking the streets and started a diary of what he sees around New York City. And I started following him more extensively because I'm not interested in his glamour pictures, but I'm definitely interested in what he sees around New York. About 3 weeks ago, he uploaded an image with the sentence, "New York is dead." And I was horrified. I was horrified. Why would a 32-year-old photographer say that New York is dead? Obviously, I saw the clips of raiding, marching, the violence. I saw all that. But why would he say New York is dead? So I said to myself, what can I do about that? What can I do about that from my desk without leaving home? Because I'm in a lockdown. I'm not leaving home. What can I do with technology? What can I do with the wandering Jew? What can I do with a Jew who wants peace? What can I do? And I said, okay, I want to speak to my cousin Noam Galai's older brother. Why? Because Yaron Galai, the oldest brother, there are 4 brothers in that family. He's a chairman of the board of a global company called Outbrain. And Outbrain is what one calls nowadays an online platform for advertising. So if you go onto a website of a newspaper or magazine, when you finish the article, there are referrals to other articles in the same subject matter. Outbrain. Outbrain is the company who refer you and actually makes money for the newspapers with those referrals. That's my cousin, Yaron Galai. So I asked Noam, do you think your brother will be interested to talk to me? He said, but of course. I said, okay. So I type a message through Messenger, Facebook, to my cousin, Yaron Galai. And I say to him, I have an idea, can we talk? And he says to me, yes, later. Okay, so this is where my presentation begins. I'm going to go back in order to go forward. So I need to share my screen, and hopefully you guys are going to see a peace sign. Is it visible?
Yes.
Great. Okay, I'm presenting a peace sign. In England, the symbol designed for the British nuclear disarmament movement in 1958. But, however, it is globally widely known as the peace sign. So for me, this symbol is very, very important. As an Israeli who grew up in Israel with wars, peace is very, very important. So, my past. Why isn't this happening? This is happening. Here we go. In 1970, when Israel turned 30, a poster called Peace, Shalom, was printed and became one of the most famous posters in Israel. And it was designed by David Tartakover. David Tartakover is a very famous graphic designer who single-handedly created the Israeli visual imagery, the language. So this is one of his most famous posters. And this is a logo that he created for the movement Peace Now. It says here, Shalom Achshav. It was the first time a juxtaposition of two fonts, and basically this was the first time the left in Israel had a face. Okay. When I moved to London, clearly the first few people I started meeting were Israelis. And one of those people was Doreen Frankfurt. She's still alive. She had a boutique in Covent Garden, designed by Ron Arad, a very famous designer. We became very friendly. She moved back to Israel, and in 2000, the Intifada started in Israel, and I got very upset. And when I get upset, I have to do something. And I called my friend Doreen and I said, what happens if we introduce the peace logo to your logo? And she said, that's not a bad idea. Because basically, there are labels on each blouse, on each skirt. You have special hanging logos, which come from her labels. Suddenly, she had a collection called DF with a peace sign on it. And it basically said, I want peace. And that came from Israel to the world because she was exporting. And it worked. Okay? She started making t-shirts, sweatshirts, and it was selling. It so happens last week I saw a picture of her on Facebook and I spotted, as you can see here, she still has her peace logo on the window on Keren Kayemet Street on Dizengoff in her shops. It's still there. Great. As you can see, Doreen Frankfurt was not the only person who came up with a peace sign. So as an Italian company called Moschino, years later, they keep on coming up with a peace sign every collection, which I applaud, of course. I don't take the credit for it. Many people can think the same thing at the same time, whatever, fine. I don't need a credit. I need a message to convey. Okay. In 2002, the Intifada was still happening. And I was working as an arts editor for a black magazine called Untold. And I was flying back and forth to Israel on empty flights. And the editor says to me, are you coming back alive? And I said, give me a few pages. Give me a few pages. And I decided to do a series of peace portraits for Untold magazine. And I had a quote from Arik Einstein, one of the most famous singers in Israel. Now's the time that everything mingles, pictures, dreams, colors, the wheel turns, everything changes, and we are living. Anu b'chaim. And I did a series of portraits which included my mother, a war survivor, my mother, volunteer writer, life survivor. There's the peace sign, there's the Hamsa, because my mother has always managed to slip into my suitcase a Hamsa. On every trip that I made to Israel, I got a wall of Hamsot right opposite my front door. Next was David Tartakover, because he was a great influence on my way of thinking of peace. I decided I'm not taking left or right. For me, the message of peace is most important globally. The next person who appeared in that series was cousin number 3 from the Galai family. He was in the army at that time. At that time, you had signs all over Israel claiming, better have pains of peace than agonies of war. This is one thing I never understood. We were the warmongers. While I come to Israel and I see, we want peace. I was raised in Israel with, we want peace. And that's why I decided I'm going to do these portraits in a black magazine of all places, but people should know. That's my voice, with a peace symbol on each portrait. My friend Leora's daughter, who was 5 years old, she was already 5-7 times back and forth to Israel. She was featured in this project as well. Okay, what happened next? Let's go back to Yaron Galai, CEO of Outbrain. So he says he's busy, he'll talk to me later. I said, okay, he's a busy man. He's head of a company of $1 billion in New York. Okay, he can be busy. I'll let him be busy. I'm going to send him a text, 2 sentences. And I send him this picture. I say, I would like to place 2 peace signs in your logo. Chutzpah, huh? Who am I to say something like that? 3 hours later, I get a text. This is not a bad idea. And he starts writing to me, and he says to me, we were thinking of changing the logo for distancing, and he sends me a logo that they did for him, and I was very good. I didn't say I didn't like it. But I said, oh, you are willing to change a global company's logo for a few days. He said, uh-huh, but I need to take it through the board. In America, every pixel, we fight over every pixel. So I said, okay, this is yours. I'm giving this to you. It's yours. I don't need money. I don't need a credit. If you can change your logo of a global company where this logo is going to start appearing in The Guardian, in the New York Times, everywhere, because if they change the logo, it goes everywhere. I will be happy that for a while, the peace symbol is going to appear in many places. Okay. There's no happy ending to the story. We're still in the process. So please do not expect miracles here. All I'm saying is I got to a chairman of a board of a $1 billion company, $1 billion company who's working. And he said, it's a good idea. This meant to me that if it's a good idea for Outbrain, maybe it's a good idea for Google. So I did some research on Google. And I found out, oh yes, they've done some really pretty stuff with their logo. They keep on changing. They have a whole department called Doodles. Google Doodles, every now and then you get an anniversary, 127th anniversary of Maya Angelou, whoever. It's very dynamic, very creative, very pretty. However, I did not want something like this. I wanted something like this. Very simple, their own logo, just add those 3-4 lines. So, Jews, wandering Jew. I've got a contact in Ireland who works in Google. So, I send a text to Nikki Honig. I say, Nikki, can I have a word? And she says, of course. I say, I would like to place 2 piece logos in the Google logo. Is it possible? She says, leave it to me. I say, what about Facebook? She says, I've got some contacts in Facebook. I will let you know. So she gets back to me after half an hour. And she says to me, Google are unapproachable. They only do everything in-house. Meaning, okay, that's what Nikki Honig has to say. I went researching online and I saw Google Doodles has an address, an email address for submissions. I submitted with no hope, but I can wait. Maybe they'll get back to me. Maybe they'll think it's a good idea. Outbrain thought it was a good idea. And I tried to find an address for Facebook that didn't get far. And then I was told, Facebook will not change anything. As my cousin Yaron said, no pixel will move, no way. So, where was I? What am I going to do with this? And I get updates from LinkedIn. LinkedIn is another social media. Now, why am I choosing social medias? Social medias are the most, everybody's now on them. So everybody may be exposed to a peace sign. That's my tikkun olam. From my desk, some pixels, that's it. So I'm sitting here and I get an update from LinkedIn. Somebody I know in Romania, in McCann, an advertising agency, has uploaded a story about L'Oreal Paris, who's produced an ad which is relevant to Black Lives Matter. And the same day, The Guardian puts an item about a Black transgender model suing L'Oreal Paris because they have whatever. So I write a text to, what's her name? It doesn't matter. The person who I know in Romania. Oh, I'm busy. Can we speak in an hour? Yes, of course. I speak to her in an hour and I tell her my idea. And of course she says, McCann, New York, I'll introduce you to Nir Refoua. Ich weiß, who's Nir Refoua? Refoua is apparently one of the top people in McCann America who's in charge of viral. Viral is moving around things. So she says to me, I'll introduce you guys. And nothing happens. 2 days, I give up. 2 days later, she texts me, why aren't you answering his messages? I'm saying, I didn't get no message. So I first of all, asked to become his friend on Facebook, and I send him a message apologizing. I didn't get any messages. Could we please talk? The next evening, friendship accepted. Next morning, this is my telephone number in New York. I write back, I'll call you in the afternoon, your time. I show him all this, and he flips. He really likes it. I say, you know what? I ain't telling you what to do. You do what you want. I don't need a credit. I don't need anything. Just get a logo into one company, into one global company. If I get it into one, others will happen. I'm waiting. I'm waiting. This is all happening now. And that's what I'm working on. And that's what I'm linking to me as a wandering Jew with contacts in different places where I think if there's a will, there's a way to make things happen. And that's what I'm all about. So, any questions? And any contacts, because you may know someone in a company who may be able to make a difference.
Daniel, I think we can go off shared screen unless there's anything else you want us to see.
Nope, there's nothing else to see.
Let us see you and see each other.
Stop share. Done. Okay. Any questions?
Daniel, hi, it's Jane. What do you want to have happen as a result of this peace logo going all over the world? What do you want people to know or to do?
I want it to be an antidote to what we're seeing at the moment from, let's say, for example, the President of the United States.
Yeah, because in the UK, that logo is very aligned to nuclear disarmament, as you say. And I'm wondering how many people will see it as being relevant to Black Lives Matter.
I don't know. I cannot answer for the nuclear disarmament. And that's why I started this presentation with the fact that, yes, I am aware, 1958, that was the logo, but it has evolved. Like, you know what? There's the rainbow. The rainbow was the gay community. Yeah. And suddenly the rainbow is now NHS.
Yeah. So, well, it's COVID, yeah.
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 So my logic is I would like a message of peace. I am not getting a message of peace anywhere. I'm seeing people angry at each other. The people who walk on the street are not even moving for each other. They're not even wearing masks.
Yeah.
So I would like a message which will unify some of us to peace.
I think universally, the ban the bombs sign, as in England we call it, is considered more of a peace sign than an anti-nuclear sign alone. And Black lives need peace as well.
Anti-nuclear armament is not a bad message as well. Let's face it.
Well, that's a matter for different debate.
Yeah, but I'm against violence, and I'm seeing violence. And that's why I started incorporating the peace sign in everything I do. I upload flowers and bugs and all kinds of things onto the medias, and I always have a tag, peace sign and the word peace in Hebrew, English, and Arabic on Instagram. I can't do it on Twitter because Twitter doesn't take Arabic. but
Really?
yeah, I can't put it on properly
Oh, okay.
with a tag because the line, it's like in Hebrew, it goes from right to left, but still it's not work.
Okay.
Funnily enough, I try to write it in one block and then copy and paste, and it messes up all the tags. Strange.
Does anybody else have any questions? Well, Daniel, thank you very much. It was very interesting.
I see I've done 36 minutes. 36 is good. It's 2 times high, so I'm pleased. I want you to know that there were 18 images in this presentation, and I use 18 as the number high. I use it in every single filter that I use on Photoshop and in every single calculation that I do. This is yet another message that I'm sending in my work, subconscious message. So everything is multiples of high.
Thank you. Daniel has spoken for us at our meetings previously, one on his career and once on a presentation that he gave to the Royal Photographic Society. The speech that we've just heard talk will be available on the Schul's YouTube channel from Sunday. And while I can still see him here, one of the people that we can see under the name Pat Evans, but next to Pat Evans is Tom Evans. And Tom Evans is our speaker next week, same time, same place, same channel. Thank
Michael,
you very much, everyone. Yes.
Next week's a fast day. You still having the meeting?
On the fast day, we are having a meeting. Pardon?
Shivaras next week.
Yeah, Shivaras Thomas. I'll ask the rabbi's view on it. We have, I've gone through with him on the emails that I send every day. There is going to be some changes, and we will not be having music without warning, and that will go on to the 9 days. But I have, everybody will hear what our plans are.
Yeah.
If the rabbi would
I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's bad to have a talk because we have talks on Tisha B'Av. We used to have giving talks on Tisha B'Av. So having a talk is, I think, is okay. But I just wanted to remind you that in case the rabbi questions you on having any meeting. But I'm prepared to join in on it.
I've had long discussions with the rabbi about the 3 weeks and what will be permitted and will not be permitted. So, Martin, it's all in hand. Okay, everybody.
Okay, good.
Thank you again, Daniel.
Pleasure.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you very much for your talk. Interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael, too.
Thanks. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Oh.